Is God in favor of pleasure? Beloved, pleasure is pleasurable to you precisely because God made it that way. God is the one who wired you for certain things to feel good and for certain things to be pleasurable to you. God's the one that wired you that way. The psalmist says, in the path of life, there is joy. And at the right hand of God, far from seeing God as a withholder, someone who's trying to keep something from you, he says, at his right hand are pleasures for eternity. Delight yourself where? In the Lord. Just as we read there in Psalm 16, verse 11, we first find the path of life, and when we find the path of life, then we find joy. The trick is to be sure that we are experiencing pleasures and joys in the way that God designed us to. It's the path of life that brings joy. The second instance, delight yourself in the Lord. This instance, walk uprightly. If you walk uprightly, God will not withhold. Wait a minute, that's exactly what Satan was insinuating there in the Garden of Eden. That God is fundamentally a withholder and not a giver. But Scripture reveals God as the greatest of givers. Is not the best known and best quoted verse in all of Scripture a testament, a legacy to God's giving? For God so loved the world that He gave. God is not a withholder. God is not selfish trying to retain something for Himself, which is precisely what Satan suggested when he says, God knows that in the day you eat of that stuff, you're going to be as gods, and your eyes will be opened. The greatest lie is that God is fundamentally trying to keep something from you, and many of us cannot break this spell that Satan has over us. We see religion primarily as a list of prohibitions rather than as a great plethora of blessings in the true life, the true joy that God has plotted and planned for you. Who better to fulfill the longing desires of your heart than Him who made your heart to desire? Are you with me, yes or no? Who better to fulfill the longing desires of your heart than Him who made your heart to have the capacity to desire? Are you with me? It is absolutely, totally, completely appropriate for you to want to love another person and to want to be loved by that person in a relational, intimate sense. But here's something I want you to think about. When Adam saw Eve, Eve was the only woman that Adam had ever seen. And therefore, Eve was Adam's standard for beauty. Are you with me, yes or no? He didn't even know that there was another kind of woman yet. Whatever Eve looked like, and no doubt she was beautiful, when Adam saw Eve, that was his standard for beauty. Are you with me, yes or no? You see, beloved, the lie of internet pornography and the lie of playing the field dating is that you can actually be satisfied by all of these different kinds of women and kinds of men. The reality is that even if you got the most beautiful girl in the world, you can just allow your mind to wander and you get the most beautiful woman. She has all of the features and figures and specifications that you would want. Beloved, in just a very short time, you'd be bored of that girl too. Because no one girl can be tall and short, black-haired and blonde-haired, big-chested and small-chested. No one girl can be Asian and black. No one girl can meet all of those things, and so too with men. You see, beloved, internet pornography creates the illusion that you can actually be satisfied, but you can't be satisfied. And it actually begins to create within you a dissatisfaction with the one that you do have or the one that you will get. Because she or he cannot be all of those things. He or she can only be the one thing that they are. And what that tells me is this. When God gives you your Eve, and when God gives you your Adam, that individual is the standard from your perspective of beauty. Adam's definition of beauty was Eve. And so it should be with us today. My definition of beauty is Violetta. Are you with me? And let me tell you something. It is far better to have a real person that really loves you than to have some internet illusion or some cultural dating illusion that you will actually eventually be satisfied when no single person could ever satisfy this veritable harem of people that you have access to online. You are setting yourself up to be totally, completely dissatisfied with any future relationship, even if he or she was the most perfect specimen that you could possibly imagine now, because after a time, you'd be bored of it. What is your standard of beauty? Don't allow your standard of beauty to be what the world tells you beautiful is. The world is consistently portrayed in Scripture as at enmity with God, as at war with God. Your standard for beauty should first of all not be primarily external. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Your standard for beauty will be the one that God gives you, and then, beloved, as far as you are concerned, many other daughters have done virtuously, but your wife excels them all. If you see that a guy's a looker, don't be interested. Because he'll look at you for now, but it's just a matter of time before he's disinterested in you and he's looking somewhere else. It is okay to love and to want to be loved. That is a legitimate desire. God has wired you that way. That's not dirty, that's not naughty, that's not unhealthy. It is absolutely, totally, completely natural to want to love and to want to be loved. And let's take it a step further. It's natural to want to have sex. That is the fullest manifestation of person-to-person relational intimacy that is available. God wired you that way. It was God that said the two shall become one flesh. Why didn't he say one spirit? Most commentators agree that God was speaking not just of relational connection there, but of sexual connection. God is the one that invented sex, and the church needs to reclaim its rightful access to sex as the fullest manifestation of the intimacy between a man and a woman. We should not be afraid to talk about it. If God had wanted, could he not have made the procreative act, right? Because what was the very first thing that God said to Adam and Eve? The very first thing. Yeah, the first thing that he said to them as a couple was, be fruitful and multiply. Now, God could have made the procreative act like a handshake. Right? And then something happens here physiologically and my wife gets pregnant. Right? He could have done that. Like, oh, sweetie, I love you. Right? God could have done that. Now, that raises the question, why didn't he? Why did God associate the tremendous pleasure and the tremendous joy and the tremendous intimacy that comes with sexual intercourse? Well, I suppose the answer is that God is in favor of sex. Now, many of us are unnecessarily inflaming our sexual desires because we're lookers, because we're looking at internet pornography, and because we're allowing our mind to run in unsanctified channels. So many of us need to learn how to reel our sexual desires in. But the foundational concept here is not a difficult one to grasp. Healthy sexual desire is designed by God and is a blessing for mankind.